Good evening, everyone. It's 8 o'clock in the East. Do you know where your children are? Okay. I sometimes have to get things rolling on these events, and that seems to be the case here. So I will go ahead and do so. Tonight, I'm in the process of finishing up this appendix of 2 essays on analytical psychology, which is volume 7 of the collected works of C.G. Jung. And this section is entitled section 5 of this appendix, the structure of the unconscious, is fundamental principles in the treatment of collective identity. And so we've been dealing with a lot of collective identity in our country in the last several years. So let's read about this together, and I'll see if I have any comments. You're welcome to make any comments you wish to make too. We'll go for about an hour tonight and then move on. In order to solve the problem presented by the assimilation of the collective psyche and to find a practical method of treatment, we have first of all to take account of the error of the two procedures we have just described. We have seen that neither the one nor the other lead to good results. Good evening, Brendan. Nice to see you. I'm continuing on to read, but there you are. Okay, and there's Jordan too. All right, so the gang's all here, and I've already read paragraph 480. I've threatened to keep reading and discussing for an hour, and Annabelle's come too, so that's great. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone, in case I forget later.
Hey, Brendan and Annabelle.
I got all dressed up with coat and tie and everything this morning. Went to school at 7 in the morning and found out there are no students all this week.
Don't you get assignments? Aren't you're substitute teaching still, right?
Right. But I can't substitute teach if there are no students.
No, well, obviously. But school was open?
School was open for parent-teacher conferences, yes.
Oh, I see.
So that's the way it is. And Justin's with us. Good. All right. So I'm going to read on and interrupt me anytime you want.
And I don't have a copy of the book because I'm still in boxes. I've moved and
you've moved. So in what state are you now?
I'm in New York State.
New York State.
Returned to New York State from New Jersey.
Okay.
I'm in New Lebanon, at the base of Mount Lebanon.
Okay, how far?
Thank you for saying it that way, because they always went, "Oh, it's Lebanon." I'm like, "It's not Lebanon." They're like, "It's Lebanon." I'm like, "What? Lebanon? No, it's Lebanon." No, that's over on the east. It's like,
yeah.
So, Annabelle, how far north of New York are you now?
3 hours, 150 miles, which can be done in 3 hours.
Near Albany.
Yes, very near Albany and near Pittsfield. Well, we talked about this. Were you born in Cazenovia? Am I remembering?
No, it was a family home though.
And that was on Route 20.
Right.
And I live on Route 20.
Oh, yes.
From Boston to Sacramento.
Right. And Cazenovia is one of the big towns in New York State on Route 20.
On 20, yes.
Right, Albany Street.
That's only 46 routes away from B hotels with criminals.
Yeah, and moreover, I have a daughter and son-in-law and 3 grandchildren, 2 grandsons and a granddaughter who live in Slingerlands.
Uh-huh.
Except the oldest one lives in Union College right now.
Yes, a good place.
Yeah. So I'm at, and so happy Thanksgiving to everyone. We'll call this
Thanksgiving.
official happy. And Brendan, good to see you also. Okay, paragraph 481. The first, by abandoning the vital values of the collective psyche, simply leads back to the point of departure. The second penetrates directly into the collective psyche, but at the price of losing that separate human existence, which alone can render life supportable and satisfying. Yet each of these ways proffers absolute values that should not be lost to the individual. Boy, I forget what the two ways are, but never mind. I think we all have. Paragraph 482, the mischief then lies neither with the collective psyche nor with the individual psyche, but in allowing the one to exclude the other. The disposition to do this is encouraged by the monistic tendency, which always and everywhere looks for a unique principle. Monism, as a general psychological tendency, is a characteristic of all civilized thinking and feeling, and it proceeds from the desire to set up one function or the other as the supreme psychological principle. The introverted type knows only the principle of thinking, the extroverted type only that of feeling. This psychological monism, or rather monotheism, has the advantage of simplicity, but the defect of one-sidedness. It implies, on the one hand, exclusion of the diversity and rich reality of life and the world, and on the other, the practicality of realizing the ideals of the present and the immediate past, but it holds out no real possibility of human development. Okay, so comments?
I think it's interesting, the psychological monism, that people, I guess, have a tendency to go with their chief psychological function, and sometimes at the expense of the other three, instead of having the one in context of the dynamism of the other three altogether. The tetrahedron comes to mind, the pyramid made of three triangles with a triangular base, where it feels like intuition is often the base triangle that is unseen. Reasons are unreasonable. It's just simply present. And then the other three seem to rotate around the top, but that's just me. Thoughts? Anyone with the one psychological function?
I have no idea what a tetrahedron looks like. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. It's
if I ever knew, I did. I'm sure I did know at some point, but
it would be something like from the top.
I got a tip about interviewing people for engineering jobs, which is if the candidate sits down and he doesn't pick up a pencil and start to draw a diagram, he's not an engineer. Okay, so that looks like a pyramid to me.
Well, a pyramid has four triangular sides and a square base. A tetrahedron has tetra being four sides, which is three triangular sides in the pyramidal shape. Look at that from the top.
I see.
And then
I see.
Triangular bottom. So
okay.
And what's interesting is there also the tetrahedron is a shape of the Japanese tetsubishi, which are they make these spikes that one goes up and then 1, 2, 3 goes down. But what happens is they would toss them out behind themselves, because no matter what happens, they're always going to land with a point up, no matter how. And so people would step on them, and of course they stop chasing them. So it's interesting. The tetrahedron has so many aspects, but I find it to be a great visual shape, three-dimensionally, to work with the four psychological functions, because no matter how you turn it, the base is always hidden, but it's still present. And the other three
it's still a triangle.
And it's still a triangle. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Um,
Kind of
okay.
going back from
Well, whatever it is, you know, as we see, when we pull to the left or right, we're trying for one perspective on the world, and we think we can make it, our side heavier and heavier until we finally win the tug of war. But the truth is we can't. And this is his point, that if
and I think that the both and instead of the tug of war, it has to have the both and. And when he says, yet each of these ways proffers absolute values, I'm kind of curious, proffers absolute values, is that symbolic or a symbol? So it's always generative, because an absolute value would be immutable. You can't break it down any further. But at the same time, it would generate something. So I don't know. Absolute values here doesn't seem to me to be some pesky idealism or philosophy concept. It seems to be something more from a Jungian.
Our former president thinks he's the absolute value for American politics, and yet he's in the process of finding out that he's not, and that's generative.
But I think it's funny when he said stable genius. I'm like, isn't that an oxymoron? Because geniuses are never like static. So stable is not the word I would apply to genius.
Right. Okay, paragraph 483. The disposition to exclusiveness is encouraged no less by rationalism. The essence of this consists in the flat denial of whatever is opposed to one's own way of seeing things, either from the logic of the intellect or from the logic of feeling. It is equally monistic and tyrannical in regard to reason itself. We ought to be particularly grateful to Bergson for having broken a lance in defense of the irrational, although it may not be at all to the taste of the scientific mind. Psychology will nonetheless have to recognize a plurality of principles and accommodate itself to them. It is the only way to prevent psychology from getting stranded. In this matter, we owe a great deal to the pioneer work of William James. With regard to individual psychology, however, science must waive its claims. To speak of a science of individual psychology is already a contradiction in terms. It is only the collective element in the psychology of an individual that constitutes an object for science, for the individual is by definition something unique that cannot be compared with anything else. A psychologist who professes a scientific individual psychology is simply denying individual psychology. He exposes his individual psychology to the legitimate suspicion of being merely his own psychology. The psychology of every individual would need its own manual, for the general manual can deal only with collective psychology. Okay, comments on that? I think that's a very profound thing to say, actually.
I think so. It seems to me, if I was his editor, I would have asked him to speak to the intellect and the feeling with its qualifier appropriately, because logic of intellect, logic of feeling, I think it should be logic of intellect, sense of feeling, because each of them needs to be qualified differently. And a logic of feeling would be sticking with the thinking function, which is the rationalistic piece. Right.
And feeling is most often irrational.
Reasons are totally unreasonable. I love that he's mentioning pioneer work of William James, though, because to me that was kind of the modern precursor to Jung and public, basically, because he was William James feels to me to be William Blake all grown up, and in a way.
Well, and there was Matthew Arnold also in the middle of the 19th century. So there was a lot going on in the 19th century where people were getting their minds around this stuff, and Freud and Jung just started to write about it more cogently, I guess. I mean, Blake was pretty cogent. Each of those guys was pretty cogent, but go ahead.
Yeah,
Annabelle.
I think Emerson was one of them.
Emerson,
also.
sure.
But I think I disagree with you about the logic of the feeling and the logic of the intellect, because it sounded to me like what he was talking about is not the realm of feeling the way we know it as irrational, but rather the fact that there is a duality in our feelings, and that we can try to follow our feelings in a linear, rational way, which will always get us in trouble. But right, I mean, I think, just my opinion, but I think that that's what he's addressing, is that whether you follow the, A plus B equals C, therefore C minus B equals A, that's the linear or the logic of intellect. But the other logic, which is, well, the last time that I stepped off of a curb, I tripped, so therefore I really shouldn't be stepping off curbs, because there's this fear, there are these dangers, there's this, right? So that's a whole logic of feeling that, anyway, that's the way I understood that. And
Well,
anyway, talking about rationality and rationalism and that whole idea of us rationalizing things.
Well, an experience.
Yes, that's
so in my case, I
yeah.
have gotten in arguments with gravity multiple times, and each time I do, I lose. Right. And,
I remember,
in major ways.
Yeah, I was going to say, just like that, don't fight the mountain, because the mountain will always win. Try to dance at best with it. You still might break something, but it might not kill you.
Every time I slip on the ice, I end up as the prize turkey for Thanksgiving dinner on the operating table.
Yeah, but that opposite of that logic of feeling, and I'm glad you said what you said, Jordan, because that is the getting back on the bicycle. Getting back on the bicycle after you've fallen off means you're not gonna kind of empower. There's some much better word for that, but you know what I mean? Those feelings that would be the logical conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, you want to ride the bicycle more than you want to worry about whether you're going to fall again.
Exactly. And also you can trust your instinct and go ahead and do the thing that maybe it was fun for a minute, then it wasn't fun for a minute, and now, you know what I mean? It's like, and then it gets into that realm of, am I supposed to be doing this? Well, I have evidence that says I'm not supposed to be doing this because I could break my leg. But then you also have the inner, and that's the irrational. That's the irrational. That's the intuition to trust.
I like that, because I think what's interesting there is you did learn something from the quote unquote mistake. But I agree, different word than empower. It feels that instead of becoming an absolute truth or rule, it's, oh, well, now there's a qualifier to this context when I do this. And it takes me back to your curb example, which I love, because your curb example is the reverse of what I call my spoon in the ocean example, where, I dip a spoon in the ocean and I look at the spoon and I'm like, oh, there are no sharks. And that means there are no sharks in the ocean. I'm going swimming. Wait, how did I get eaten? But I still stepped off the curb, but I didn't let the spoon drive the entirety of my further actions.
Yeah. So Penelope says Mesmer was interesting, and Emile Coup on the mind. Freud used hypnosis for a while. The mind is malleable, but I am not sure about the soul being. Do you think the soul is malleable, Brendan?
Definitely. And I love, and we know this to be true. I'm just going to find you now. We know this to be true because on your website, what does it say on your website about influencing the mind of God? What's the backdrop to your website? It's the most profound statement about the plasticity of the soul.
Right, which is, you add one person to the mind of God, you change God.
Mhm.
That's from paragraph 617 of Answer to Job, I believe.
And that becomes then God as the collective psyche, God as the collective unconscious. And you add any more, and it does change. I mean,
It does change,
I
and
put
we
this
all have
spoonful
different.
in the ocean. It's now the ocean's one spoonful bigger, but no one's going to notice. But it's still.
But to be aware of it is enough. I was interested. You were talking about Matthew Arnold. We have. When I was a little boy of 20, teaching in the ghetto in the, it was called Toxteth, the ghetto of Liverpool. I was 22, I guess. We had Matthew Arnold Elementary School, primary school right there. So yeah, extremely influential mind. And you mentioned William James and William Blake, and who else did you mention?
Emile Coué.
Yes.
Emerson, right?
Emerson, yeah. I was at the ballet at the Kennedy Center on Friday with one of my students celebrating his 10th anniversary with me. And I was struck by how psychologically aware, of the psyche, Sergei Prokofiev, the Russian composer, who was the first half of the 20th century. His music depicts every human emotion. And if you guys ever get a chance to see Cinderella by Prokofiev, watch it, go to it, and see how the music paints every facet of the romantic mind, of hatred, of jealousy. It's just incredible. So,
yeah, interesting. Okay, reading on. 485, paragraph 485. These remarks are intended as a prelude to what I have to say about the handling of the aforesaid problem. The fundamental error of both procedures consists in identifying the subject with one side or the other of his psychology. His psychology is as much individual as collective, but not in the sense that the individual ought to merge himself in the collective, nor the collective in the individual. We must rigorously separate the concept of the individual from that of the persona, for the persona can be entirely dissolved in the collective, but the individual is precisely that which can never be merged with the collective and is never identical with it. That is why identification with the collective and voluntary segregation from it are alike synonymous with disease. I'll read that last sentence again. That is why identification with the collective and voluntary segregation from it are alike synonymous with disease. So we are diseased if we all fall for our former president, and we're diseased if we all are oil and water to our former president.
We're diseased if we buy into the myth, which is unfortunately exacerbated every time we pick up a smartphone. Ironically, we're diseased if we buy into the myth that we're all separate, that we can turn on and turn off people, that we're all individualized, not reliant on each other, not part of the great whole. That's an amazing disease.
I love that, Brendan, because actually I had a client today at my table, and they were in Costa Rica, and they have their 18-year-old son is autistic. He's 6'8", weighs like 310 pounds. It's like this massive man, you know. And she said he acts like a little boy, and she said, but he also, unlike most autistic children, he doesn't have the emotional intelligence. And when he turned 18, they were in Costa Rica and they went to a casino, and he put in like a quarter or $1 or whatever one of the lower amounts was, and immediately won $8,000.
Mhm.
And so when they got back, you know, he made his deposits and did all this stuff. And then she said, well, you know, honey, when are you going to go get a job? He goes, a job? I'm going to the casino. Money, job, that takes too long. And there was that whole false sense of urgency thing of, you know, picking up the phone.
Yeah.
And if it's not there, you just move on. And I don't think it has anything to do anymore with tenacity and resistance. There's just this false sense of urgency and an inability to actually immerse yourself. Like, okay, you walk into the Pueblo. Okay, get the guide. Let them draw you into the pool of what is this place throughout the last couple thousand years. And
Yeah.
instead of people, you know, looking at the walls and then they run out. Like,
Deb was telling me,
gratification.
yeah, Deb was telling me about how sports betting has begun to, you know, cause many more gambling addictions, because apparently in all the stadiums now, whether it's baseball or football, European style football, whatever it is, they have these betting games, and they'll give you $200 to start for free, and that they just keep going on these big scoreboards all the time, all through the game, and they bet on all kinds of things, like, you know, how many yards will the guy make in the next play type stuff, and it can all the betting can be handled on your iPhone. And so they're turning people into betting junkies now.
Yeah, it's like you're going to 10 horse races at one time or more.
Or more. Yeah. And doesn't sound too appealing to me.
No.
You know, I used to go to games, but I'm not so sure I would want to go anymore. Okay.
And that's the thing too, is they're not able to focus on the game. They have the game, which they may or may not look at here and there, and then they have the gambling, and then do I need another beer, or do I want a hot dog, or
yeah, I want to pay $1,000 for this ticket so I can do the gambling.
Yeah, exactly. Talk about it covered. They give you 200
Right.
free, so you really only paid 800. I mean,
Right.
they really get you if you do that.
Okay, paragraph
And
46.
if I could just say that one of the most extraordinary adverse reactions to a drug that I've encountered in my editing pharmaceutical advertising
Mhm.
is Parkinson's drugs, where one of the adverse reactions is gambling.
Oh boy.
Oh.
Direct.
Oh, wow. So it creates an OCD-ish kind of response.
Only about gambling.
Hmm.
It doesn't say it could turn you into an alcoholic. It doesn't say you could turn into a OCD something else, obsessive. It's specifically gambling.
Wow.
Which seems, I mean, I don't know. It would be fun to kind of research, but it's commonly true for only one type of drug, which is a Parkinson's disease drug.
Right. Huh.
That's interesting, because my dad had Parkinson's, and it's interesting that would exacerbate the sensory piece, instead of they're typically moved into a more laconic, fewer words, slower physiological place, and that's kind of going tapping up the energy in terms of actions, but on quick return kind of things, you know, which is
Right.
kind of, that's
And it's
interesting.
definitely inner, you know.
Yeah.
Gambling is an inner game, I think.
Yes.
I mean, not even a game. It's an inner Well, it's like a
Compulsion.
disease, yeah.
Well, if you've
Compulsion.
ever read up on the gambling psychology, where they have now different programs, well, they'll see somebody, professional gambler even, hitting the slots or something, and they'll put someone on them, and they'll start making algorithms that change the slot machine payout to quicker, not, or noise, loss. But the thing is, they've started to realize that the person gets the same dopamine rush from the loss as the win, except they associate the win with something positive. And so they just keep hitting the dopamine rush until they don't have any more buttons to push. And get the mirrors up on top. Someone's there just, oh, this person's going to win. And this a friend of mine goes in once a month to this one place when he comes back from the mountains, and he takes $25. And it was from me and a gold painting buddy. We used to take $25 with us to see who could lose it faster. And the thing is, what we learned is, if you win once, stop, cash out, eat, and leave. I mean, it's like, because that's the only way to go against their system. But even the better way is just don't go in the door.
Right. So Richard Casper says, what a fearful thing it is to fall into the hands of the living God. And certainly that's what happens in a casino. And that's what's happened to all of our seniors who believe in the casino we call Wall Street. So, paragraph 486, it is simply impossible to effect a clear division of the individual from the collective, and even if it were possible, it would be quite pointless and valueless for our purpose. It is sufficient to know that the human psyche is both individual and collective, and that its well-being depends on a natural cooperation of these two apparently contradictory sides. Their union is essentially an irrational life process that can, at most, be described in individual cases, but can neither be brought about, nor understood, nor explained rationally. Boy, did I see that this week, this last week, where I was in a high school in suburban Maryland, and they had the Pledge of Allegiance, and not a single one of the kids would repeat the Pledge of Allegiance. They simply ignored it.
Wow.
And you can guess the makeup of the class, but anyway, that's the way it was.
Wow.
Okay. 487. If I may be forgiven a humorous illustration of the starting point for the solution to our problem, I would cite Buridan's ass between the two bundles of hay. Obviously, his question was wrongly put. The important thing was not whether the bundle on the right or the one on the left was the better, or which one he ought to start eating, but what he wanted in the depths of his being, which did he feel pushed toward. The ass wanted the object to make up his mind for him.
That's gambling.
Yeah.
And will.
Right. 488. What is it at this moment and in this individual that represents the natural urge of life? That is the question. Paragraph 489. That question neither science nor the worldly wisdom nor religion nor the best of advice can resolve for him. The resolution that can come solely from absolutely impartial observation of those psychological gems of life, which are born of the natural collaboration of the conscious and the unconscious on the one hand, and of the individual and the collective on the other. Where do we find these germs of life? One man seeks them in the conscious, another in the unconscious, but the conscious is only one side and the unconscious is only its reverse. we should never forget that dreams are the compensators of consciousness. If it were not so, we would have to regard them as a source of knowledge superior to consciousness. We should then be degraded to the mental level of fortune tellers and would be obliged to accept all the futility of superstition, or else, following vulgar opinion, deny any value at all to dreams. Comments?
That reminds me of my extension of Nietzsche's quote when he says, if you gaze long enough into the abyss will gaze back. Except then I added, yep, but if you gaze too long, the abyss will lean forward and say, it's rude to stare.
Right. And right. And so Richard Casper's comment, what a fearful thing it is to fall into the hands of the living God, that the only God there is living, and it's living amongst us. And we have met the enemy, and he's us, as
Yep.
Bogo had it. Okay.
One thing that's kind of perplexing, he says, if it were not so, we would have to regard dreams, them as a source of knowledge superior to consciousness. Then we should then be degraded to the mental level of fortune tellers. And it's interesting to me there because there's a lot of parlor trick stuff and snake oil stuff, but some people can see farther. And I'm not one of them. My horizon may be wide, but it's not fortune teller wide. And for those people that are actually real there, it feels that they're dealing with this wonderful translator of symbols where the things that don't need words, they can aptly give words to. And I mean, you get Nostradamus stuff, and which parts of it are hocus pocus and which parts of it, that he hit that on the nail on the head. Or did he hit the nail on the head because someone interpreted the metaphor and it was actually pretty vague and it really didn't say that, but then it's convenient to add the numbers to it. I mean, so that right. I love this, the superior source of knowledge superior to consciousness, which I think dreams kind of are, because they give us a more robust expression.
Well, they give us a symbol. They give us a symbol that isn't this or that. It's the combination.
And it's living.
And it's the solution, basically. Now, Richard says carbodopa, levodopa, cinnamate, close parent, is the culprit in creating, I presume he's talking about creating the gambling addiction.
That's the
drug, that is.
Yeah, those are the components. Yeah.
And Amelia is here with us also now. So nice to see you, Amelia.
Interesting, Skip, that you're doing this. I'm kind of half listening to you, and then I listened to what Jordan just said. And what I'm actually doing right now is I'm putting together this weekend's worship aid. And I was just thinking of Nostradamus right now, because the second reading in liturgical churches this weekend is this: brothers and sisters, you know the time. It is the hour now for you to wake from sleep, for our salvation is nearer now than when we first believed.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Isn't that funny?
Because you can put that on anyone and they have to take responsibility for it now. But even more than the last time you said it and it didn't work, but now, but wait, there's more.
That's right.
Right. So, but Penelope says, I dream every night. I appreciate my dreams, however difficult some of them are. Yeah, we have to pay attention. If we can, get to our notepad and write it down, which I often don't succeed in doing. Paragraph 488. What is it at this moment and in this individual that represents the natural urge of life? That is the question. 489. That question neither science nor worldly wisdom nor religion nor the best of advice can resolve for him. The resolution can come solely from absolutely impartial observation of those psychological germs of life, which are born of the natural collaboration of the conscious and the unconscious on the one hand, and of the individual and the collective on the other. Where do we find these germs of life? One man seeks them in the conscious, another in the unconscious. But the conscious is only one side and the unconscious is only its reverse. We should never forget the dreams. Oh, I guess I read this already. We should never forget the dreams are the compensators of consciousness. If it were not so, we would have to regard them as a source of knowledge superior to consciousness. We should then be degraded to the mental level of fortune tellers and would be obliged to accept all the futility of superstition, or else, following vulgar opinion, deny any value at all to dreams. Okay, I apologize for rereading.
No.
that.
So now I'm having a recurring dream of a Jungian paragraph. I just had it twice.
Okay, going on. 490. It is in creative fantasies that we find the unifying function we seek. All the functions that are active in the psyche converge in fantasy. Fantasy has, it is true, a poor reputation among psychologists, and up to the present, psychoanalytic theories have treated it accordingly. For Freud, as for Adler, it is nothing but a symbolic disguise for the basic drives and intentions presupposed by these two investigators. As against these opinions, it must be emphasized, not only on theoretical grounds, but essentially for practical reasons, that although fantasy can be causally explained and valued in this way, it nevertheless remains the creative matrix of everything that has made progress possible for humanity. Fantasy has its own irreducible value, for it is a psychic function that has its roots in the conscious and the unconscious alike, and in the individual as much as in the collective. Boy, that's really important. Creative fantasies. Well, we're talking about how we could have our guests next year in our confluence, which will be October 13th to 16th, 2023 at Mount Madonna Retreat Center in California. We're talking about how we could, as a group, write a fairy tale. And I think that this is an interesting intro to that idea. Okay.
That's interesting because how a group could write a fairy tale. Because I remember a game we'd play in college sometimes at parties where you take a sheet of paper and you fold it in like 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch pieces. And then you write one line of poetry and then you fold it over. And the next person writes another line and they fold it over. So you can't see what came before or can't see what came going to come after, obviously. So you can't see anything in context. And then at the end, the last person, when the page is done, reads the whole thing as one piece.
It's very funny. It's a great game to play in cars as well.
Yeah. And it never failed that anywhere between 1/4 of the way through or 1/2 of the way through, even if you did 4 lines, it was by line 2 or 3. If you did 20 lines, it was by line 10 or 15 or 8 or 12 kind of thing. It started to become a cohesive piece. And it's interesting because even the non sequiturs would somehow actually resonate with each other. And it's a great game in the car too. I mean, because it takes you in a wild place, because then there's this anticipation too of, is this going to suck? Is this actually going to be a poem, or is it going to be 20 separate lines?
Mhm.
And it usually became something. I mean, never like, Nobel laureate something, but at least it was fun and interesting.
Yeah. That's an interesting idea to fiddle with. Okay,
Kind of a
490.
collective fantasy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
491. Whence has fantasy acquired its bad reputation? Above all, from the circumstance that it cannot be taken literally. Concretely understood, it is worthless. If it is understood semiotically, as Freud understands it, is interesting from the scientific point of view, but it is understood hermeneutically as an authentic symbol. It acts as a signpost, providing the clues we need in order to carry on our lives in harmony with ourselves.
I find that interesting because the semiotically, that's the symbol, the immutable sign in the symbol, whereas hermeneutically is learned. I mean, so there's something that's immutable, ever present, semiotic, and then something that is learned or of knowledge, which is hermeneutical, if I'm reading this correctly, if I'm remembering my philosophy terms.
And I think, I'm not sure, I listen to those two terms as being semiotic meaning more embodied, and hermeneutic being more recollection of what is past.
That's.
But I maybe that's different. I'll have to hear that again, Skip.
Okay, I'll read it once again. Paragraph 491. Whence has fantasy acquired its bad reputation? Above all, from the circumstance that it cannot be taken literally. Concretely understood, it is worthless. If it is understood semiotically, as Freud understands it, it is interesting from the scientific point of view. But if it is understood hermeneutically as an authentic symbol, it acts as a signpost, providing the clues we need in order to carry on our lives in harmony with ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think, Brendan, that I resonate with what you said, because I just looked it up to kind of dial back to, okay, what am I remembering and what am I misremembering?
Me
But
too.
hermeneutics deals with interpretation.
That's right.
And especially a biblical, which would be fantasy fairy tale. I mean, the metaphoric. Now, I don't mean to disparage it, but it's more metaphoric.
No, absolutely.
And then the semiotic is that immutable. It's in a sense a priori. It comes before time. I mean, it needs no preface. It is natural and already there, which would be embodied. It's present. Yeah. Where hermeneutics would inherently say that present tense is dropped into context, and then you can have an interpretation based on its relationship to one or other pieces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that was it.
Okay, paragraph 492. The symbol is not a sign that disguises something generally known. Its meaning resides in the fact that it is an attempt to elucidate, by a more or less apt analogy, something that is still entirely unknown or still in the process of formation. If we reduce this by analysis to something that is generally known, we destroy the true value of the symbol, but to attribute hermeneutic significance to it is consistent with its value and meaning.
Mm-hmm. Meaning don't destroy its value. Don't destroy its value by too much analysis, but it is worthy of interpretation.
Sure, and so I think the theorem of Maria fits in here, where you have an individual, and the individual takes on a relationship with someone of the opposite sex, and then they're a couple. The word couple is a symbol of the two of them in their relationship. And then they produce a child, and then they're a family. And so the word family is a symbol of what they are as a group. Okay. And then that family becomes something new again. And it rises to the next plateau. In other words, if they have another child, it could become a symbol of a two-person family, right? Or a two-child family, or a three-child family. And
I'm assuming you're Maria Prophetessa, 3rd century female alchemist.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 4, which becomes 1 again.
And
okay.
Also, too, that works without kids. I mean,
Well, I mean, I just use the family as a very simple example of how it works, but it can work in, a zillion other environments.
Well, I'm kind of going to the example right before your example. I mean, before the kids, the one person couples with another, so the 1 becomes 2, and the 2 together is a couple, which is the 3rd. And then in context, how they operate will be the 4th. Now, then they have a kid, and we run the same example, and the same thing happens. So that really applies. What I like about that example is it applies at all the scales, and regardless, it shifts focus to redirect scale. So I really think that's a great example here.
Yeah, I mean, it becomes, the child makes it a family, right? And then, and so the family is now a new thing, which is a 1 again. Mm-hmm. And that 1 becomes 2, maybe it becomes 2 children. And so that's a 2-child family. Okay. And so forth. So anyway.
It's kind of Earth, Sun, Earth, Moon kind of thing. It's like you have the sun, then you add the Earth orbit, and then you add the moon, and there's a whole system.
Yeah. Okay. 493. Let's see, where are we going here? Okay. Yeah. 493. The essence of hermeneutics and art widely practiced in former times consists in adding further analogies to the one already supplied by the symbol. In the first place, subjective analogies produced at random by the patient, then objective analogies provided by the analyst out of his general knowledge. This procedure widens and enriches the initial symbol, and the final outcome is an infinitely complex and variegated picture, the elements of which can be reduced to their respective tertia comparationes. Certain lines of psychological development then stand out that are at once individual and collective. There is no science on earth by which these lines could be proved right. On the contrary, rationalism could very easily prove that they are wrong. Their validity is provided by their intense value for life, and that is what matters in practical treatment. The human beings should get a hold of their own lives, not that the principles by which they live should be proved rationally to be right. Okay.
Yes.
You want to comment on that?
Yeah, don't get bullied by the status quo of anything other than. It reminds me of Jung saying, "Be very, very wary of any diagnosis given to you by anyone other than yourself." Every diagnosis you're given is simply a recommendation or an observation. And
right. I mean, the whole thing is about you got to find a way to live your life. Right. And your life is different from anyone else's. That's what Jung knew, right? And so you have to give people the freedom to live their lives and not be stuck in reductionism, which is what Freud did, and not be stuck in, oh my God, we have to reelect Donald Trump or the world will go to hell. Well, that's not true. Right.
Well, yeah, and I think back to the Freud piece, Freud was more of an ivory tower rationalist, which
Right.
ended up becoming shaming behavior, whereas Jung was not prude like that. And he would hear it, take it in. This is what has occurred. I mean, if it was dangerous, that's a different thing. But
Right.
otherwise, it's personal choice and personal actually experience, even beyond choice. Whereas Freud seemed to, honestly, Freud seemed to want to keep you as a client his whole life. So I feel like that's psychological recidivism. You're not really letting someone out of the chamber.
Right.
Whereas Jung wanted to teach you how to do it for yourself because he didn't want to see you for the rest of your life.
Right.
Like, I don't know, I'm not in a relationship with you that long. So
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
it's also a question of whether one or the other was a doctor, using a very broad definition of what a doctor is. Is the purpose to heal and transform and improve, or is the purpose to have a process that's just going to go on ad infinitum, and presumably
Well, yeah.
pass on to the children?
Is it a process to correct you to be this kind of human being, this
Right.
person, or is it to make it possible for you to live and experience your life in your own way?
Right,
Right.
right.
yeah, and the first one is brainwashing. It's trying to get you to be something, and regardless of what that something is, it's going to be something that you're not.
It's unattainable.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is evident from our election already, notwithstanding the Georgia senator seat, is that a lot of people thought that they couldn't live without Donald Trump, but apparently they can, because there weren't, as far as I know, there were no violent attacks on polling places or any other such thing. Nobody got upset that his people lost, that I saw.
Yeah, well, I think we've just now gone back to the normal violent attacks that we had before. Like was it the 5 or 9 people killed in the LGBTQ dance club in Colorado Springs, and 25 people injured? And so now, instead of political, it's going, okay, let's go target.
Yeah, let's go back to our social things again.
Targeting,
but in every case, it's about what he's talking about, which is you can't have monism. You have to let a society breathe and be itself, and you can certainly try to influence it to be one way or another, as Jesus Christ did, right? He influenced his society, and the result is a quarter of the human race follows him today, and the same with the Buddha, right? And the same with Hinduism. But the point is that you're going to be yourself, and you have to accept everything. I mean, the United States is really the perfect example of what should happen, which is we have representatives from every national origin, every religion, every race, color, and creed in the world here, and they're all American, and we all live together. We actually do live together, and except at election time, it's a really good thing. At election time, we're we're still trying, instead of trying to think about policies that will benefit us, we're trying to think about monism again and how to get everything to be perfect in this one way, which is what Trump or what Jung, okay, now there's a Freudian slip, what Jung is trying to say to us, right? Which is, Jung is trying to say, you have to let the society breathe.
Well, yeah, and I think the higher octave of that is the concept of dignity in difference, culturally, individually, and societally, as the Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs promoted. Yeah, and he was all over that. And to me, what is happening with that dignity of and difference is, or dignity of difference, is the beauty of healthy interdependency, so that you can have. I mean, I guess what Buckminster Fuller said, tension is integrity, which means it's connected to something. Something's connected. Something can have integrity without any context because it doesn't need any. It's monism. It's its own one thing. But
so anyway, the substance of this is that Jung was against monism, I guess. And so
I think I because I think it's also boring, and when everyone honestly,
geez, if everybody is the same, I mean, we see that in some movies that have been done where everybody is the same, and it's such a boring society that.
But that's the world we live in terms of friendship groups on Facebook or friendship groups on Twitter, and that you only speak to the people who agree with all your opinions.
Well, and what's interesting to take that, and to take that though back to your engineering example earlier, or the engineer, military policy, you do not walk across the bridge lockstep marching. I mean, because what that'll do is cause a standing wave that continually amplifies, and the whole bridge will come down and collapse itself like a rope. And so, to me, the connection of a bridge is a very important visual metaphor of not monism, but dignity and difference. Of, okay, what we want now is everyone to walk as much your way as possible across this bridge so that nothing happens and the bridge doesn't get destroyed. But if everyone walks lockstep, marching in the same step across that bridge, it will destroy the connection.
Yeah, you have to stroll across the bridge. There's a terrific experiment that you can do in a small classroom with quarters. Give everybody a quarter and have them start pounding the quarters on their desk. Click, 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 click.
Oh, wow, yeah.
And what happens within 90 seconds is it's just you immediately hear the marching feet.
And that, and also if the school floor loading wasn't engineered for 100 or more PSI, then the floor is going to start to do this. It's going to get in a standing wave based on the uniform loading of all the pieces. And so, I mean, it's called damping. Every time I walked into a house, and people are like, oh, the structure seems strong. They were, okay, good. You're cheerleading your house because you just bought it. I get it. But I'm not here to let you die. So, and I would walk in and I go way up on my toes in the center of a room. I mean, after I kind of bounce a little bit, because the last thing I want to do is put myself through the floor. If I can tell before that it's not going to hold. But then with all my weight in a whip, boom, and you slam down your heels both at the same time. And if you don't get a woo, it stops. Or it just starts to do this. It's called damping the floor. And what happens is if it doesn't dissipate in one wave, like, okay, I may smack the floor and I may feel a vibration, that's fine. There has to be some deflection or a structure will explode because there's nowhere for the force to resolve. But then you can immediately tell the sponge, Or if you go around a room and you're going, oh, well, there's a couple of joists missing under here. How do you know? Well, I heard it. What do you mean? Come over here and stomp your foot, and the floor actually kind of does that. So you can play the X-ray vision just with you yourself floor loaded. So I think that bridge example, the quarters, is a great example, because at first what happens is they're all going to be like a big old flam tap, but then after a while they get into sync, and because they're trying harder to match each other, and finally they do. And you're right, it's this,
and it's done entirely unconsciously. You can't stop it.
Yeah
Yeah,
you can't stop it.
yeah. Okay, I need to wrap it up for tonight. I started, even though I didn't teach today, I started at 5:30, and I'm gonna give it a rest, and we'll continue on with this next week. And perfect. In the meantime, I want to wish everyone a very happy and safe Thanksgiving. Okay.
Thank you. You too.
Nice
happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, stay off the road. And
don't
I hope you don't have too much snow up there, Annabelle.
No, we've had 3 little snows. And they haven't lasted because the sun has been beautifully intense. But besides the days of snow, we've had a few days that were right around 20 degrees. Those were rougher than the days of snow because I saw today. I got my snow plowing guy. I've made my bond with him.
Yeah, you need that guy. If
snow comes, it'll be taken away by a guy who I met today.
Well, that's
recommended
wonderful.
by my postmaster.
Uh-huh.
I trust implicitly.
Yes, absolutely. That's what you have to do in upstate New York. They're the people.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because our days have been, this last week was kind of cold, but it was 20s to 35. So it's not bad. But then, I haven't been up at the butt crack at dawn this last week. I knew it was cold, but I swear, I go to the grocery store one evening, and half and half was really the only thing I needed on the list. So I come back with like 3 bags of stuff, and I'm going through, and guess what I don't have? I didn't notice half and half, but I didn't notice. I'm putting it all away. Well, I noticed the next morning when my coffee was ready, and I opened the fridge and went, oh, well, black is fine, but no, not so much. So it's 7 in the morning. I go hop in the car, right? And the windows are all frosted over. I just didn't feel like scraping it. I just turn the defrost off and wait. Well, I'm waiting and I'm waiting, and the car is warm and nothing's happening. And I just reach up on the dash and push outside temperature. It's like 9. I went, oh, that's why. It's like, so I turned the air conditioner on to equalize the outside and the inside on the windshield. But anyway, I laugh. Our weather hasn't been that severe either. None of that 79 and
well, I saw the 6-foot stream going up north of where you are, where my daughter is. Are you east or west of Albany?
I'm east of it, quite a bit east, because I'm right by the Pittsfield line.
Oh, you're right by the Pittsfield line.
Yeah.
Debbie used to live in Pittsfield. Back in the day. Her father was the YMCA director there.
Oh, I've been to that YMCA.
Huh. Years ago.
I've been there, yeah. Well, it probably wasn't that many years ago, but I was 25 or so years ago.
Yeah, Deb's dad was there like 50 years ago.
Yeah.
So they finally ended up in Troy, New York. Yeah. So anyway, peace, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. Nice to see you both, Adam.